Hello and welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to cover the anatomy of the accessory organs in the digestive system. So now that we've covered the anatomy of the different structures in the digestive system, we have some organs we call accessory organs for assisting the digestion of the food we eat. And those are the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. But I also mentioned the spleen as well, even though it's not a part of the digestive system, but a part of the lymphatic system. The spleen, along with most of the intestines and the stomach, are what we call intraperitoneal organs. But again, I'll talk more about this later. So in this video, I'm going to cover the topography of the liver. I'm also going to cover the margins and the groove of the liver, and also the porta hepatis with the ligaments you'll find connected to the liver. And then in my next video, in part 2 of the accessory organs, I'll talk about the structures and the walls of the bile pathway, and also the topography and structures of the pancreas, and then the topography and structures of the spleen. So we'll start with the liver. So the liver, or the hepar in Latin, is the largest internal organs we have in the body. It's here, just in case you didn't know. It sits on the right-hand side of the belly and weighs about 1.5 kilograms. It's quite heavy. The liver has a lot of vital functions in the body, but here are some general ones. It has a digestive function by producing bile, but it also processes the nutrients you absorb. It detoxificates the body, transforming the potential harmful substances such as drugs and alcohol into harmless products to be eliminated in the bile or urine. It also produces cholesterol, which is used for production of hormones and also vitamin D. And also, many nutrients are stored in the liver, including certain fats and glycogen. And this stored glycogen can be used in case of low blood sugar, for example. So it has many functions. And as always, looking at the anatomy of the organs, I like to start with the topography for better understanding. So if we add the lines and look at the holotopy, meaning the position of the liver in relation to the body as a whole, the liver actually covers the whole upper level of the abdominal cavity within the ribs. And you will find it in the right hypochondriac region, the epigastric region, and also extending to the left hypochondriac region. And then when looking at the skeletopia of the liver, the superior border, as you see right here, starts at the level of the 10th rib, and then extends up to the level of the 4th intercostal space, and then goes to the 5th intercostal space left to the sternum. And then it ends at the 6th intercostal space. So that's the superior border. And then the inferior border is here, and also starts at the 10th rib at the right side and goes up to the level of the 8th and 9th rib, and then extends up to where the cartilage of the 9th rib meets the cartilage of the 9th rib. And then it ends at the 6th intercostal space. So as you see, it lies inside the rib cage. And then posteriorly, you'll find it between the 9th thoracic vertebrae to the 11th thoracic vertebrae. So that is the skeletopia of the liver. And I'll go over to the syntopia of the liver, meaning its position in relation to other organs. We'll look at the superior border first. This surface, we call it the diaphragmatic surface, because you will find the diaphragm resting on it, as you see here. And then the inferior border, we call this one the visceral surface, meaning the surface towards the different organs. So if we zoom in, you will find the pylorus of the stomach being very close to the visceral surface of the liver. But you also find the upper part of the duodenum. You will find the colon. You will find the right kidney. And you'll also find the esophagus and the upper part of the stomach lying on the superior end of the liver. So if you ask me, it's very strategically well placed in the body. Now, continuing with the anatomy of the liver, if you look at it anteriorly, you will see a distinct ligament in the middle called the ligamentum falciforme. And this ligament separates the right and left lobe. And so the liver has two margins, right? You have the inferior margin projecting downwards. And this margin is pretty sharp in shape. And then if you look at it posteriorly, you'll find the rounded posterior margin, which is not as sharp as the inferior one. And what's interesting here is that The whole liver is covered by ligaments and fat, except for this area right here on the posterior margin called the area nauda, or the bare area, which is directly in contact with the diaphragm, because remember, the diaphragm lies on top of the liver. So now that we're looking at the liver posteriorly, let's go ahead and look at its distinct features back there. And we have three important grooves on the posterior surface. The first one is the right sagittal groove. The right sagittal groove is formed by two other grooves you'll find on the visceral surface of the liver. And here I want you to imagine the inferior vena cava running in this direction, forming this groove, right? So the right sagittal groove goes like that. It is formed by the fossa for the gallbladder. This is the gallbladder right here. And it's also formed by the fossa for the inferior vena cava. So that's the right sagittal groove. It separates the right lobe from all the other lobes you'll find on the liver. And then we have the left sagittal groove, and to understand this groove, you need to know the ligaments down here. So down here we have the ligamentum teres hepatis, or the round ligament. And this long ligament right here is called the ligamentum venosum. And these two ligaments form the left sagittal groove, which separates the left lobe from the rest of the lobes. And then finally we can see one more groove called the transverse groove. And the transverse groove lies directly in what is called the porta hepatica, and can in many ways use the word transverse groove as a synonym for porta hepatica. I will elaborate porta hepatica in a second, but let's just look a little deeper into the transverse groove. So the transverse groove goes like this and separates the caudate lobe from the quadrate lobe. So when you look at the liver anteriorly, you will see two lobes, right? But posteriorly, you can see four lobes. So you have the right lobe, the left lobe, the caudate lobe, and the quadrate lobe. Now, I want to change the focus a little bit over to porta hepatica. So the porta hepatis is a short, deep depression, and there's a few things that goes out from this place. And the first thing is going to be, you're going to find the common hepatic duct coming out from it. You also find the hepatic portal vein and the hepatic artery propid. You also find some hepatic lymph nodes and also some nerves called the hepatic plexus coming out from it. And they're all embraced by the hepatoduodenal ligament. If you imagine, it starts from hepar and then goes to the duodenum. Therefore, it's called the hepatoduodenal ligament. So the liver is protected, right? It's protected by something called tunica fibrosa, which is a fibrous sheath. And then on top of it, it's covered by something called the peritoneum. I'll talk more about the peritoneum in my next video, but imagine this is a vertical section of the abdominal cavity, right? The peritoneum has two parts. You got a partial peritoneum in green, which covers the surrounding walls of the abdominal cavity. And then you have the visceral peritoneum, which covers the organs inside the abdominal cavity, here in blue. So not only is the liver covered by tunica fibrosa, the fibrous layer, but it's also covered by the visceral peritoneum, also called the tunica serosa, because the peritoneum forms a serous membrane which reduces the friction of surrounding structure. So it's really good to have this visceral peritoneum covering the liver as well. But the whole liver is not covered. There's actually a place called area nauda. Remember I mentioned this earlier, the bare area which is in direct contact with the diaphragm. Now, to understand the anatomy of the liver fully, you now only need to know the ligaments that connects the liver to the diaphragm up there, and the ligaments that connects the liver to the two other organs. So let's look at the ligaments around the liver in a little more detail. So the ligaments from the liver to the diaphragm are 3 or 4, because you have a dexter and sinister here, the right and left. And you have 4 ligaments connecting the liver to other organs. So let's look at the ligaments towards the diaphragm first. The first ligament is anteriorly called the ligamentum falciforme, connecting the liver to the anterior wall. And then if we remove the diaphragm, we'll see the 2 distinct ligaments on either side connected to the falciform ligament in the middle, called the ligamentum coronarium. And the ligamentum coronarium connects the liver to the diaphragm. And then again, just to remind you, here in the middle is the area nauda. You'll see the coronary ligaments surrounding it. So if you look at the liver superiorly, you'll see that the coronary ligament surrounds the area nauda. Alright, so there is one more ligament here called the ligamentum triangulare, the triangular ligament on either side. You can actually see that it looks triangular. So this is the left one, the ligamentum triangulare sinistrum, and then this is the right one, the ligamentum triangulare dextrum. Dextrum is right. So that was all the ligaments on the anterior superior side. Now over to ligaments that goes from the liver to the other organs. These are 4 ligaments, and they all start from porta hepatis. I want you to keep that in mind, that all these ligaments start at porta hepatis. So the first one is the ligamentum hepatogastricum, and as the name says, it goes from the liver to the stomach, or in Latin, it goes from hepar to gaster. That's why it gets the name hepatogastricum. And then the next is ligamentum hepatoduodenale, going from the porta hepatis of the liver to the duodenum. This ligament contains the bile duct, veins, nerves, arteries, and things coming out from the porta hepatis. Remember, I mentioned that earlier when I talked about the porta hepatis, that all the things coming out from porta hepatis lies within the ligamentum hepatoduodenale. And then next we have the hepatorenale. Renalis is kidney in Latin, so it goes from the liver to the kidney. And the kidney is behind here, so it goes like this. And then we have the ligamentum teres hepatis, the round ligament. This one projects anteriorly, and this one right here, and extends from porta hepatis to the umbilical ring, or the navel. So that was it for the anatomy of the liver. Now the part 2 of this video is going to be mainly about the structures and walls of the bile pathway, and also the pancreas and the spleen.